Hey everybody, this is Jared with Meeple Mentor, and today I'll be interviewing Jamey Stegmaier from Stonemaier Games, and I have him with us here today. How are you doing, Jamey?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. It's a privilege to have you on the channel, and I gotta say I'm a big fan of your games. I know we've covered a lot of your games tutorials and stuff on the channel so far, and so thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and I appreciate you covering our games. Yeah, we were talking about that before we went live, but you've done a great job introducing people to the rules of our games.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I know so far we've got Wingspan plus its expansion, the European expansion, Tapestry, and most recently Charterstone on the channel. So starting off, I just had a couple questions I wanted to ask just to kind of get some feedback from a game developer's perspective and also just to kind of get to know you so that our Meeple Mentor fans can kind of see where you're coming from and kind of learn more about you and what you do on a daily basis, I guess. But before you, or besides designing games, what else have you done professionally, and kind of how has maybe some of those earlier jobs before what you're doing now led to and influenced your games that you've designed?
Yeah, I've had two mini careers after college, and during college, I waited tables at some restaurants, and that actually really helped too with what I learned about customer service there. I've tried to apply to my job now. But the first career I had after college was as a project manager at a medical textbook publishing company. And so I learned a lot about project management and managing different authors and typesetters and kind of just managing all these different people that come together to make a project happen, which the same thing happens in the board game world. And then my career after that was as a director of operations at a nonprofit facility on a university campus. And so I was managing people. So I learned a lot about managing people, what worked, what didn't work. And I was doing some fundraising too because it was a nonprofit. And so I learned a little bit about event planning and how people can feel engaged in a nonprofit by donating and being a part of it by participating as volunteers and through other forms of giving. So I learned a lot about that approach. And then at the tail end of that, I launched the Kickstarter for Viticulture, and eventually, about a year later, moved on to run Stonemaier Games full time.
Excellent. So it definitely sounds like you had a lot of good experience, even just sort of with planning and running a business, because you ended up not only designing games, but you run Stonemaier Games.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I wasn't an entrepreneur before that. I wasn't running my own thing, but I was learning a lot of these different pieces of the businesses without the pressure of having the entire business on my shoulders. And so that was nice, a nice way to learn through experience before I got to the real thing.
Sure, that's really helpful because I know if you don't have like either a mentor or someone like helping you slowly learn the skills, it can be pretty daunting, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it also actually helped. One other thing that helped was that I've been blogging. I've had a personal blog for a long time, coming up on probably 15 years now. And so having that habit of writing and putting my thoughts into writing and engaging with people in the comments really helped once I got to Kickstarter. And now that we don't use Kickstarter, but I'm in a lot of different Facebook groups and Board Game Geek and figuring out how to respond to comments without being defensive and engaging people and getting and asking questions so that they participate in the conversation. Learned a lot by doing that, by getting like years of practice of writing and responding in the comments. You're probably getting a lot of that right now. You answer a lot of questions in the comments of your videos. Have you?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
starting to happen that way. So I'm trying my best to keep engaged as well. And I know you actually wrote the book on, kickstarting and crowdfunding and stuff like that, which it sounds like was written right after Viticulture launched on Kickstarter.
It was, I finished it, like it went to print right before Scythe launched on Kickstarter, which was 2015. So I think I started writing it after Euphoria in 2013, and it spanned, months and months of writing it and compiling some of the Kickstarter lessons that I had on the blog and converting them to a more of a narrative book format. Yeah, so I don't remember exactly when I wrote it, but I think it went to print before Scythe because the book kind of ends with saying like, "Hey, I have this project coming up next. I don't know how it'll do. We'll see." And Scythe turned out to be a pretty great project for us on Kickstarter.
So Viticulture was sort of your first big published game, is that right? What
Yeah,
kind of led you to develop that, or what were sort of your ideas that led you to create it?
well, I'd been designing board games as a hobby since I was a kid, but I didn't really think of it as a potential, really even in the terms of having anything published until I started to see a few games show up on Kickstarter. There were games like Ryan Lockett had one of his early games on Kickstarter of Red Raven Games. Patrick Nickel had a game on Kickstarter. Just a few scattered games. I think Tasty Minstrel Games was on there. Sentinels of the Multiverse was on there, one of the early versions. That kind of reinvigorated me because I always wanted to try to start my own thing, run a business. I'd always also wanted to design a game and have it go beyond just playing it with a few friends. And I loved seeing the engagement on Kickstarter. I love seeing these people, individual people, get engaged in projects, and the idea that I could run a project and know who all the people were who were excited about it. That all got me really excited, and I wanted to. So I set off with that kind of goal in mind, that idea in mind, and
Yeah.
to design Viticulture.
So why winemaking, and like what was the inspiration to make that, your first kickstarted type of big release game?
I wasn't fully engaged in the board game community at the time. And so a lot of my assumptions were based on what I thought instead of what was necessarily true. And what I thought at the time is that there were lots of great games on the market, but I thought that there weren't a lot of strategy games that would be appealing to non-gamers. Basically games that weren't sci-fi and fantasy. As much as I love sci-fi and fantasy, I wanted to have a game that could bridge that gap. Looking back now, I see that there were plenty of games that did bridge that gap, but Viticulture has done pretty well. So maybe it was a good timing for me to bring a game like that to the market. So yeah, winemaking seemed like this rustic, kind of romanticized idea of running a vineyard, something that most people probably don't want to do in real life, but in board game form, in 90 minutes, it's something that I thought people might appeal to people.
Now, after Viticulture, I'm sure with the experience and then seeing what else is out there, what other types of things inspired you to take on different themes or different projects, other than saying like, okay, well, if there's everybody doing this, I should do something different. Like, is that always the case, or do you have any other inspirations for how you design?
Yeah, the closest thing that I've carried over from that at this point, because I know way more about the board game community, the industry, and I've played so many more games since then. The thing that's helped me since then is that whenever I publish a game, I definitely want it to be something different. I don't want it to be something that's been done before or has already been done better before. And so I still take that approach of trying to do something that isn't already on the market, but I do so now with a lot more context than I had then. But a lot of it, what drives the games that I publish now are I play a lot of games from other designers and other publishers. And so I learn a lot from those games. I'm inspired by them constantly. Almost all my games have some sort of mechanism that's inspired by another game, at least in the original form. And then as I play test it, it grows and develops into something else.
So when you work on a new game, do you start with like a theme, or do you start with like game mechanisms and then build something around that, or what's kind of your process?
It really depends on the game. Like Scythe, for example, Scythe started with me discovering this world that the artist had started to build. And so it really was an art first game and a world first game. I discovered this world. I wanted to design a game in it. I have another game that will hopefully come out next year that is also art first. I discovered the artist. I knew a theme that I wanted the artist to work in, and so I went in art and theme first. Tapestry was a kind of a theme first game as well. I wanted to design a civilization game, but pretty early on in the brainstorming process for any of my games, the theme and the mechanisms get mixed together. I have a long list of mechanisms I want to work with. I have a long list of themes that I want to work with, and a long list of artists that I want to work with. So I kind of just mash them together and see what fits at any given time.
Do you have any like favorite mechanisms that you're like you always keep returning to? Like worker placement with Viticulture and Charterstone and that sort of thing. Or do you try to branch out as much as you can and try new things in a sense?
I do really try to to experiment with new things. I did find myself early on, like Viticulture was worker placement, Euphoria was worker placement, Charterstone was worker placement, all in different ways, but they all were still worker placement. And so as much as I love worker placement, I've been trying to challenge myself to try other themes and other formats. Scythe is not worker placement. It's action selection, engine building. Tapestry is not worker placement at all. And a couple games that I'm working on now don't employ worker placement at all. So I have tried to poke around with other mechanisms. I do have some favorite mechanisms that I want to use someday, but I haven't used yet. I cut, you choose. I love I cut, you choose, and I price, you choose. That's something that I'd love to play around with someday. Yeah, and even deck building. Deck building and bag building is a mechanism that I love that I haven't used yet.
With those,
do you have a favorite mechanism that you often gravitate towards that you'd like to see in a Stonemaier game? Yeah, what is it?
And yeah, like so, I got to say, worker placement has always been my favorite. So and I haven't said it yet, but Viticulture is my number 3 favorite game, like
oh wow,
of all time.
Cool. I'm flattered to hear that. Thank you.
And as far as your comment on, wanting to make a game that's accessible and sort of bridges the gap between new gamers, I do often show that as sort of like the second game in, so I might start with your, Ticket to Ride or something, and then I show them viticulture and I'll say, hey, we'll have a glass of wine, it'll be fun, and it all makes sense, and so it's usually my go-to for that. This is what a good worker placement game looks like.
Oh, cool. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And hopefully we'll see some more expansions to Viticulture. I'm a huge fan of Tuscany. I really don't play Viticulture without Tuscany anymore. It's kind of like, to me, part of the game, like it's just so crucial. Do you have any other ideas for expansions to Viticulture?
I actually just play tested one the other day on Tabletop Simulator. Right now with social distancing, I can't play test in person, unfortunately. I really miss doing that. But yeah, there are a few designers. I'm acting more as a developer on this expansion, but there are two designers that are working on it that have come up with something. I kind of challenged them to come up with something new. I didn't want just like more visitor cards or more special workers. I didn't want something that we've already done. And so they are taking a very different approach that still feels very much like viticulture that I am really excited about. I don't want to say much yet because I don't necessarily know if it'll work out, but I loved the first play of it. And it wasn't the first play for them, it was the first play for me. So
Right.
I think that we have the potential of having a very new, very different viticulture expansion come out in 2021.
Excellent. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that. Do you think it'll be kickstarted or just a straight retail release?
Yeah, we haven't used Kickstarter since 2015. That was the last time. So I'm hooked on just making stuff that I believe in and letting people know about it when it's ready and letting them have it right away, rather than making them wait like 8 to 12 months to get it. So
Sure.
no Kickstarter in the future.
It's interesting. So from a guy that like literally wrote the book and got to start with using Kickstarter, now you're kind of completely saying, all right, I don't need it anymore, so I'm not going to use it. And I think it's cool that you can even get to a point where, you don't like have to use crowdfunding. Like your company, your name, like all of that is already to such a high level. I mean, you tweet something, you're going to have 100,000, people know about it.
I don't take it for granted, but it is nice that we have a built-in audience, built-in number of people who follow us. But at the same time, my company wouldn't be here without Kickstarter. So I'm very grateful for the 7 projects that we had on Kickstarter. Appreciate the foundation that it helped me lay.
So that leads me to a question about how people are purchasing games now, and like, what do you think your opinion is for like how it's been divided up now between a lot more on like Kickstarter versus just online buying or in-store friendly game store type of purchases? Like, how do you see the effects of those differences and as a designer, developer, and someone who sells games?
Yeah, I'm pulling up right now. I do a demographic survey every year. Yeah, let's see. And last year the data showed this is answered by people that follow Stonemaier Games. So it's definitely, biased in a way. 23% of the people said that they buy games through local game, hobby, or bookstores. 39% primarily buy games through online stores, and 35% buy directly from the publisher, either through Kickstarter or the publisher's web store. Probably mostly Kickstarter there, but some web store. At least for us, it would be web store. It's neat to see that a decent number of people are still going to the local game store, but a lot more, the biggest portion there is from online stores. And it was also exciting for me to see that a number of people are willing to buy directly from the publisher, especially as I see more and more, unfortunately, some scam websites pop up where people are buying nothing. They're buying thin air from these scam websites. So I would prefer they buy from a real official source like the publisher and know that they're getting the real product.
And of course, I'm always concerned now that we're in this current pandemic and everyone's quarantined, and how that's going to affect not only publishers, but like our local game stores and how long they're able to stay open. So I know a lot of people are concerned and wanting to support them while also keeping up with supporting the publishers. So from Stonemaier Games' perspective, how has COVID-19 really impacted you guys?
Yeah, I'll answer in terms of Stonemaier Games and about retailers. As you mentioned, I think retailers are in a precarious spot right now. But I think one fortunate thing that I'm seeing is that we are entering a period of curbside pickup. Like, I don't know about you, but I either had delivered or have picked up food from a number of restaurants recently because I want restaurants to survive too. And I think a lot of game stores are doing that as well. I know it's not ideal. Game stores are meant to be a welcoming place for people to come in and learn and scout out games and play games. That isn't possible right now, but I like that people's mindsets seem to be open to that curbside pickup culture right now to help those stores survive, which I think is fantastic. As a publisher, we have seen a number of people order online or order from our web store recently. our web store sales have been very strong recently. The downside of that is our fulfillment center is limited because they are under very strict limitations of social distancing and the number of people that can work at the warehouse at a time. So instead of shipping 2,000 games a week or 2,000 shipments, they're down to right over 500, a little over 500. Even if like we just did a pre-order for Pie in the Sky, which is probably fuzzed out right there, but
Yeah.
and we got 1,000 or so orders yesterday, and that means that they won't be able to fulfill. Like some of them will be fulfilled right away, but it'll take a few weeks for us to fulfill them. Whereas normally all of them would have been fulfilled by the end of next week.
And I think everybody kind of understands that we're all in this together, and there's all these, precautions that everyone needs to take. So, I think everyone's accepting of the delays that happen with fulfillments and just general online purchases.
It has been neat to see that. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
There's always outliers, but for the most part, yeah, people have seemed very patient. I think the only ones that are maybe a little less patient, and I get this, are people with parents who maybe are looking for ways to entertain their kids right now. They're like desperate for ways to do that, and they are maybe a little less patient. But if we ever hear from someone who says, I really need this by this weekend, or I have a birthday coming up or an anniversary, we'll make it happen. But most people are just other things to do, and they're patient and waiting for when we're able to ship it to them.
So I'm thinking about too, like as an industry, and I mean, yeah, we can take into account COVID-19 currently and how that's going to impact things, but
yeah,
I'm kind of thinking too outside of that as like we go down a year, 2 years, even 5 years. Where do you think like the board gaming as an industry is going to be headed? And do you think like more technology might be implemented, or what do you see as the future for board games?
beyond COVID? Because I
Yeah,
think
beyond
COVID
COVID.
will okay, beyond COVID. It's been interesting because people have asked this question for a few years now, but especially about the technology. Will we see more apps in games, more digital implementations? I think apps are just as difficult to implement into a game as they were a few years ago. So I think I don't know if we'll see like a big growth of that. I think we'll see a steady number of games every year that use apps, hopefully in really clever ways, and in games where maybe the apps are necessary. But I don't think we'll see a huge increase just because the process of designing and printing a game is very different, I think, than developing an app. And the timelines are often different. The skill sets are very different. I know how to design a game. I know how to hire an artist for that. I know how to do all that. But I've also seen from the development side that for apps that's a whole different process. It takes a lot more time. It can also take a lot more money. So I think we'll see some of that. I think that we live in a day and age where you can manufacture almost anything. And so I think we'll continue to see every year some components that we've never been able to see before, simply because we can reach out to manufacturers now and say, hey, I want you to make this thing, this weird thing that's never been made before. And multiple manufacturers can say, sure, yeah, we'll make that for you. And I love that. So I think it's a time for designers to really be able to think outside of the box and make any component they want because it can be made.
If you had to choose like a favorite component from any board game, do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I have a video about this. It's been a while since I filmed it. But one I don't think that quite made the video. Have you played The Rise of Queensdale? You heard of that
No, I
game?
haven't.
It's actually a game
I've
if you
heard of it.
enjoyed.
I haven't played it.
Okay. If it's a legacy village building game that actually has some similarities to Charterstone, but it's very different. So if anyone plays Charterstone and you're itching for another village building legacy game, I highly recommend Rise of Queensdale. And it has this dual layered game board where at times you have to extract tiles that are built into the game board. You have to extract them from the game board. And to facilitate that, they include a plunger in the game. It looks like a toilet plunger, but miniature size. It's like a suction cup, and you suction it onto the tile and you pull it off.
Huh.
And it's just a fun component. I don't even know if it's completely necessary, but I think they realized that they could make it, and it was fun, and they did, and it's pretty cool. So that would have to be
That's
up there
awesome.
among my favorites. What about you? Do you have a favorite or memorable component that you've played with?
There's always apps, right? I mean, that's kind of its own thing. I'm looking at some of the games on my shelf. I really like the Black Angel ship,
Oh yeah,
the
mhm.
miniature.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not as like functional as some of the other pieces that you might use in a game, but
yeah,
I just like the look of it. So I don't know, I'm more of a sucker for like really nice looking plastic miniatures.
sure.
I'm in love with like the Nemesis, miniatures that are in that game, the aliens and all that stuff is just, I don't know, it just looks cool. So
Yeah.
that sort of stuff is kind of where I fall in. Here's one. So what's one game that you love that you wish you had designed?
One that's popping into my head right now is Raw. Have you played Raw?
I have not.
It's an auction game that plays up to 5 players. It's probably my favorite auction game. I think it is my favorite auction game. I also really love QE, but Raw, I think, is a fantastic auction game. And it has push your luck plus auctions. I love push your luck. I don't always love auctions, but it works so well in this game. So Raw is definitely one. If I were to design an auction game, I wish it could be as good as Raw.
I
Yeah.
have a copy of Amon Ra. Is that the same thing?
It isn't. It actually, it might be the same designer. That designer, I think it's Knizia, has experimented with a lot of different types of auctions. He's like the master of auctions, and I think Amon Ra is
Yeah.
in that realm of his auction games, his auction series. Yeah.
Okay. It's on my shelf of shame, but you know, I read some of the rules and I'm like, okay, that was an auction type of game too, but
Yeah.
it's not raw as what you're talking about.
Both Egyptian and I think same designer. Yeah.
Do you have, if you could choose like your favorite top one or two board games of all time, that what would you think are some of your favorites?
Yeah, and I'll look at my shelf over here. I did my last top 10 list a few months ago, and at the top was Clank at the time. I just finished Clank Legacy. I love standard Clank. I just love the game. I have so much fun every time I play Clank. Also up there would probably be Tzolk'in and Downforce, and yeah, I'll name those three right now. There are definitely some two-player games I really enjoy too, like Seven Wonders Duel, Hanami Koji. Those two-player games often compete to get on the top 10. Yeah, have you played any of those games? Tzolk'in, Downforce, Hanami Koji, and Clank?
Yeah, I've played Clank, but not the Legacy version, just the regular and the space. And I have Zolkin and
Mhm.
Teotihuacan, and those are similar. But it's one of Zolkin's an example of a game that I love to play, but I'm terrible at it.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, like I can't ever win. Like I can make things
Uh-huh.
happen and it feels good, but it's like, I, I always lose. You know what?
Yeah.
It's funny though, because I mentioned Viticulture's on my top favorite games. I love playing that, but I don't often win.
Yeah. That's a sign
Maybe you
of
have some good
yeah,
tips for me.
of some good tips for viticulture. Probably if you've played it so much that you probably know the obvious things. Like sometimes people try to plant on all three fields, and I generally discourage that. I often end up just focusing on one field, having like one really good field that's a mix of red and white grapes. At
Right.
most two. Not It's very rare that you really need three fields going in viticulture because you can only
Yeah.
harvest at most two at a time. That's the main tip. I need to think of maybe some advanced tips for someone like you who has played it a bunch.
It's like I get so close, and then the last turn I end up losing something or whatever, and it's like,
Yeah.
again.
Well, and actually, one thing that I often do that does help in Tuscany, one of my first moves, and you can do this if you don't, if other people in your group don't often do this, but in Tuscany, on the Tuscany board, you have the trade option in the summer where you can
Yeah.
trade for different things. And I almost always, if no one else takes it, I almost always go there and do two trades in the first year to get grapes on the board, even though they cost victory points, usually, or
Mhm.
money. Usually I spend victory points on them because grapes just age freely throughout the game.
Right.
And so I love getting grapes going early. I think that's pretty much the earliest that you can get a grape on the board in the game. You can try that. I
Yeah.
don't know if you try that, but you try the next time you play.
I'll try to keep that one in mind.
Yeah.
We talked about like the different games that have been pitched that you didn't get to accept, and kind of wish you had. But I'm also curious, what do you think is the strangest game pitch that you've heard that you had to reject for whatever reason?
That's a good question. I am actually my co-founder Alan. He works part-time for the company, and he is the first filter, or he's kind of the second filter for game submission. So he sees a lot of the crazy stuff that comes through, and usually by the time I see it, it is much more in line with meeting the guidelines that we want. So I haven't seen a lot, but there is one that I think kind of fits into that category. Probably the most famous game that was submitted to us that I decided not to publish, and it became a game called Anachrony from Mind
Yeah.
Clash Games.
Yeah.
Yeah. David submitted Anachrony to us years ago. I think it was pretty different than the final form, but it did have the idea of sending stuff from your future self back to your past self, which I love that concept. But the
Yep.
rest of the game just seemed complicated and complex and kind of out there. And that's kind of what it ended up being. It's a very complicated, complex game, probably too heavy for Stonemaier Games. I love that idea, and I love that went on to be a very successful game.
Oh, me too. And actually, Anachrony is probably in my top 15 or so.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm a big fan. Of course, I love the sci-fi, the time travel, and it's
Yeah.
worker placement. So it hits
It is worker
all
placement.
the check boxes for me.
Yeah, yeah, and nice minis too. If you have
Oh yeah.
the big mech minis or the
I've
mech suit.
backed their current Kickstarter to try to get the big Infinity box or whatever.
Oh,
So
cool.
on the Meeple Mentor channel, I did a lore video for Anachrony,
Oh, cool.
because not only is it a complicated game to play or rules to learn, it also has a really robust and deep backstory to it. And I don't know if it had
Nice.
all the storyline and everything there by the time, early on when you guys looked at it. But it's really expanded, and their website has lots of details about all the leaders and the story of the civilization. And so I was trying to think about other Stonemaier games that have that kind of deep lore to the board game. And if there would be one, if we were to do a Stonemaier game to do a lore video for, what do you think would be the best fit?
That's a great question. Probably, and you probably either Euphoria or Scythe. But if you want to wait a little bit later into this year, we do our game that's coming out, probably our only game that's coming out in 2020, does have a significant amount of lore behind it, and I think that lore will grow. We might want to talk a little bit later this year about that game, because I think that game actually would benefit from a rules video and from
Sweet.
a lore perspective as well.
Well, we'll
Yeah,
we'll stay in touch and talk about that.
yeah, yeah.
Is there anything that you can share at this point about that game? Any, title, gameplay, any kind of thing to get people excited about it?
I've avoided spoilers about this game for a while now. I'll say that this is not a game designed by me. It is a game designed by another designer, so it's coming in from an outside perspective. That's probably all I should say for now. Yeah, but
Okay.
we'll actually I can say when we'll start to talk about it. I think we will start to talk about this game in early July. So that's when we'll start to unravel exactly what it is.
Can you say if it's a designer we've known or heard about, or are you willing to say who it is?
I think this is their first published design, so I don't think it's someone that anyone would have heard of at this point.
So it's like another Finding Elizabeth Hargrave kind of thing.
I hope so. Yeah.
That's awesome because that was a awesome success to have such a unique game like Wingspan come out from an unknown designer, right?
Yeah. I think it's been very good for Elizabeth. It's been very, very good for Stonemaier Games, and it's neat that it was her first published design. Definitely not her
Yeah,
first game design. I think she had worked on other games before that, but they just weren't published.
gotcha. So as far as game designers go, you're very well respected, very well liked in the community, and as you mentioned, like you stay engaged with the community. You've got a YouTube channel. You regularly do podcasts and AMAs and things like that, and including supporting various gaming podcasts and channels like Meeple Mentor. So why do you feel like this connection with the community is so important with board games?
I've been surprised. I mentioned that I wasn't particularly invested in the community or involved in the community around in 2012 before Viticulture. And I quickly realized the sheer amount of like love and generosity permeates throughout the entire industry and the entire community. That's a generalization, but I think it is true for the vast majority of people. People find their podcast that they love and they become really involved in it. They find their channel that they love and they watch every episode and they participate in the comments, they answer questions. There's so many people in like the Facebook groups for our games who aren't even like official volunteers for Stonemaier Games. They have no direct connection, but they are happy to answer questions because they know the rules of our game so well. And that spirit of generosity is just incredible to me. I'm sure it exists in other industries and other communities too, but I love that spirit, and I just have wanted to be a part of that. I want to continue to add value to people in as many ways as I can because of the sheer amount of love and generosity that I've seen from them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've experienced the same, and actually, I'd say like I'm one of those people that I've been playing board games my whole life, but I got more into the hobby like as modern gaming goes in the past 5 or 6 years. And
Yeah.
before that, I was more of like a video game type of person. And I got really sick of the sort of community, if you want to call it that, around video games and just
Yeah.
sort of like the animosity and such like, I don't know, combative behavior that I saw. And I was like, I don't need that in my life. Board gaming was such a great, open arms type of community and face to face and just a lot more benefit
Yeah.
that I appreciated. So that's a big reason why I really fell in love with board gaming, modern type stuff.
That's awesome.
So here, I don't know if you've gotten asked this question a lot, but if you had the opportunity, would you be interested to create a game based on another IP that's already out there? Like, I don't know, if someone came up and said, "Hey, we want to make a Indiana Jones game or something." Is there any that you're interested in, or have you ever looked into that?
There are a few that I am interested in. Yeah. I think the most likely scenario is where it's an IP that I reach out to them first and say, I love your IP. I would love to design a game in that world. That's kind of what happened with Scythe. It just wasn't an unknown. It wasn't a known IP at the time. Yeah, I can see there being a situation where that happens. It just has to be the right IP. Is there an
Totally.
IP that you'd like to see that you haven't seen in a game, whether it's a book, movie, TV show,
Um, I've
like a
actually
video
kind
game?
of really enjoyed that there's a lot of love for like the movies, like 80s and 90s kind of movies are kind of
Mhm.
getting a comeback in the form of board games.
Yeah,
Like in the
yeah.
past year, we've seen Jaws come out.
Mhm.
We've seen Horrified, which is not just 80s, but like earlier classic horror movies. And then The Shining came out. I'm a big
Oh yeah,
Kubrick fan, you know,
yeah.
so I like to see that kind of thing as long as the game is done well. So.
That's cool. That's an interesting trend. I hadn't noticed that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's really happening. I'm not sure like who said, "Hey, let's all do this," but it's it's like everybody's starting to do that now. And I saw so there's Jurassic Park, Danger, Jurassic Park, something like that. Big Trouble in Little China.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's another one. I feel like that's one of the ones that kind of started the trend.
Yeah. Stranger Things probably had an impact on all this in some way, bringing us back to 80s nostalgia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of Stranger Things, there's a D&D Stranger Things like RPG book out there now.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, so well, I don't know.
Yeah.
So Charterstone, it
Yeah.
was a successful legacy campaign type of game. Since Charterstone, do you think that you'll be doing another legacy game in any capacity?
I'm really interested in telling stories through games and giving players narrative, probably even more narrative than there was in Charterstone. There wasn't a ton of narrative in Charterstone. There's some, but not a ton. But the legacy format itself, which for me is defined by a game that features permanent changes that can't be undone. So permanent changes that can't be undone. I don't think I'll be trying that again. It takes a lot to design a game that does that because every decision has an exponential level of importance and branching paths and things like that. I am working on a game that is more of a not quite campaign, but it has ongoing and persistent elements, but not permanent. It can be reset. Yeah,
Cool.
I will
Kind of
continue to
like
play legacy games. I still love them, but I'm just probably
yeah.
probably not going to design it.
So I know a lot of your games are probably play tested over and over and really strive for both balance, you know, like among the variable powers and things. But there was some initial controversy, I might say, with the release of Tapestry. And
Mm.
a lot of gamers had vocalized similar opinions that the game was not fully balanced. And then a few months afterwards, Stonemaier released an official adjustment to the rules with some of the civilizations, which I did include in the Tapestry tutorial on the channel.
Thank you. Yeah.
My question then is, do you agree with the opinion that the game wasn't balanced at release, or do you think that you adjusted the civilizations just to sort of appease the fans who thought that it was or wasn't?
Yeah, so as with any game, we play tested a ton. We do a ton of blind play testing on games. But with any asymmetric game like Scythe, like Tapestry, especially with strong asymmetry, I kind of acknowledge that no matter how much playtesting we do, we're never going to be able to playtest as much as the many tens of thousands of plays that will follow it. And so from the very beginning, I actually put in the Tapestry rulebook on the fourth page, I'm sure you saw this, that I asked people to report the winner of their game and I think the final score so that we could use that data to perhaps eventually adjust the civilization so they could be as balanced as possible. So from the very beginning, I kind of acknowledged, hey, I know that there may be some things that we missed, and I want there to be a formal platform where we can adjust them on an ongoing basis based on tens of thousands of plays versus a few hundred plays. And so I was maybe a little bit surprised by some of the responses to it because we're essentially admitting that we are fallible and human as any game designer is and going into it saying that we want this to be as balanced as possible in the long run. And so we have a platform for that. So it was a little surprising to me to see that people expected perfection from the start. I would love for it to be perfect, but I just know, as with any game, like Terra Mystica, one of my favorite games from some brilliant designers, they've had to make changes over the years because of some balance issues that were discovered. I don't know, it just happens in games. And so the one other thing that we've changed in the process to help that from happening in the future is that there is a data analyst who analyzed Charterstone really, really well. And I've kind of brought him on for play testing now. So he doesn't actually play test, but he reviews the data with me so that he can approach it from a data analysis perspective in case I am
Yeah,
missing anything from that data. So
right.
I think that maybe the one thing that bothered me the most about it is people saying that we didn't play test it enough, and it wasn't about the number of play tests. It was
Yeah.
at best maybe about how we analyzed that data, but it was also about us admitting no matter if we playtest this 1,000 times, we are still not going to find everything that people find when they play this tens of thousands of times.
Yeah. And it's gotta hurt when you hear like all these comments like, oh, you didn't do this or blah blah blah. And it's like, well, we did, but like you said,
Yeah.
we're doing the best we can here.
Yeah, and it depends on how people say it too. I
Yeah.
read those comments online. Some people say, clearly this wasn't play tested at all, and I'm like, come on, like clearly it was play tested quite a bit, or it wouldn't even be functional. Yeah, but yeah, people are welcome to express their opinions.
Well, I think it's a fantastic game. I have a lot of fun with it, which is again one of the reasons I wanted to cover it on the channel. So I did. So you also, so it looks like lately you've been a big fan of like using upgraded tokens with your games from Top Shelf Gamer. I also use a lot of their upgraded tokens, and
Oh,
like
cool.
there's a lot of upgrades for Scythe specifically.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how that combination of using Top Shelf Gamer or using upgraded components came about with a lot of your games?
Yeah, it started. We have an interesting relationship with them that has been very fruitful, I think, for both of us. It started out like before I even knew about Top Shelf Gamer. We had a line of realistic resources, so we published 7 different. We call them kind of treasure chests of realistic resources, different realistic resources. It started with Euphoria, kind of inspired one of these boxes, and then we just made more and more so that people could have these fancy components for games. And then eventually we started selling them through Top Shelf Gamer. And then it got to the point where they were kind of just handling the entire process so well, other than us manufacturing the components, that they bought that brand from us. They bought the Realistic Resource brand from Stonemaier Games. It's now a Top Shelf Gamer brand, and they've added it to all the other cool stuff that they make and outsource as well. So it's almost hard to distinguish now which components were originally ours and which are now theirs, because they're
Right.
totally so in charge of the brand. But yeah, I love what they make. They're great people, and it's great that you've decked out some of your games with their fancy components.
Yeah, I got to connect with Chad over at Top Shelf at a number of our local conventions because he's,
Oh yeah.
he lives like 30 minutes from us here
Oh,
in the
awesome.
Raleigh area.
That's
So
great.
it's been cool just to, make connections in person organically.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, Chad and Marlene are wonderful people.
Absolutely. I like to say I also was able to teach them how to play Anachrony since we talked about it.
Oh
I taught
really?
them how to
Yeah.
play Bora Bora, and I think there was another one recently. But yeah, since we brought up Anachrony, that was a fun teach to have them there because we got to use all their upgrade tokens for the game.
That's cool. That's really neat.
So in general, when you're playing a game or you're designing a game, what do you think makes a game fun? This is more of like, I guess, a philosophical question, I guess.
That is a tough question. Because fun
That's my
isn't.
philosophy background.
What makes a game fun? I don't know if I have a great answer for that. It's definitely, I mean, I come at it from a slightly different perspective, which is I pay attention to the moments in games when I am having fun, and it often is it is above the theme and the mechanisms. It's something less tangible to me. Like I can design a theme, I can design a mechanism, but I need to playtest and discover fun. I need to pay attention to my feeling. Am I feeling like this is fun right now? And
Right.
if it is, I try to uh, accentuate that concept in the game or stick with it at least. And if it's not fun, if I'm frustrated, I try to get rid of it and replace it with something that is fun. But I don't know how to quite answer the way that you phrased it. Do you have a good answer for that?
So it's definitely one of those questions where if I were to ever write a book, it would probably be titled "Why Are Board Games Fun?"
Uh,
And it would probably just go chapter after chapter and give examples. But
mhm.
I'll initially say that it can't be just tied to winning, because like I said earlier, like I love viticulture, but I don't win a lot, but I
Yeah.
have fun every time I play it. And there was also something I read from Richard Garfield, and one of the things he said is it's important if you're designing a game or whatever, if you have an open mind and try to play every game to the point where you understand why it's fun.
Mm.
And even if you don't like the game, you should play it until you know why other people like it. And I found that a really kind of insightful, statement because it's true. Like a game wouldn't really be published or it wouldn't be, liked or played by people if someone didn't think it was fun, even if you don't like it personally. The concept of what makes a game fun is there's a lot to it and obviously opinions and that sort of thing. But from a designer's perspective, you're making something like a product that says like a million people are going to like this. They're going to agree with me that this is a fun thing.
Right.
And meanwhile, maybe hopefully less than that population will not, say, hey, well, I didn't like it. But you have a very successful track record of having really fun, really well-liked games. You've got a number of games in the top 100 BGG lists. And past that, they're all really highly ranked. There's something you're doing right that is clicking that, point of saying like, most people find this fun. And I'm just curious if there's anything that you can sort of identify as someone who's making those great games, like this is the common thread that makes these all very appealable or very accepted or fun for people.
Well, I love the way that you described it there, because and especially the idea of what Richard Garfield says about kind of putting yourself in other people's shoes and finding out thinking from their perspective, why do other people find this fun? And I kind of look for that when I play test. I'd say maybe the main common thread I can think of through our games that I look for is, for me, I think it's fun to make decisions that make me feel clever and decisions that I have control over, where if I have a large amount of agency over my decisions in the game, rather than it being a random outcome or a luck-driven outcome. I still do love a little bit of luck. Like in Viticulture, you're drawing cards blind. You're drawing an abundance of them, and therefore hopefully getting at least at certain times cards that are really good for you. And some cards probably not quite as good, but you have so many of them that it doesn't matter so much. But I love that little touch of uncertainty added to the agency of when do you play this card? How do you play this card? How do you maximize this card? Giving players an opportunity to feel clever through all those elements of agency. So that I think is pretty prevalent through our games. For me, that is fun. I don't think that's necessarily fun for everybody, but for the people who are drawn to our games, I think that's probably fun for many of them.
Yep. Healthy dose of strategy with a little bit of luck to throw in the mix.
Exactly. Yeah.
That should be like the headline for Stonemaier Games.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Jamey, for talking with me today, and I appreciate your time taken to just chat about board games, which we both love. So thanks for coming by.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yep. And feel free to stop back by any time again, and we'll do this anytime.
Great. That sounds awesome. Thank you, Jamey.
All right. Thanks, Jamey.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.